Greetings here from Detroit. We're in the bat cave of our school here, Engaging Ed headquarters slash my office slash closet. We're very happy to be here. I'm here with Neil Weatherby, my fellow engaging educator. Here's Neil.
Hello, everybody.
We are here today to talk common sense for the Common Core. Hopefully you're able to join us last time for part one. The recording of that's going to be available quite soon, I've been assured. Um, but right now we're talking part two, which is all about assessment. Our mission here today is to provide a common sense approach to the Common Core standards. It's certainly a challenge, and with a lot of information out there and a lot of opinions on both sides of this sort of hot button topic, we're sort of hoping to help everyone make their own decisions and be informed, most importantly, about the new standards that are headed our way. When it comes to sources and where we're getting our information, all of our information comes from the standards themselves, and also today specifically from the assessment consortia that are going to be creating the assessments that will be starting in the spring of 2015. More on those later. If we didn't get our information from there, we got our information from people who consulted those consortia or from publications written about or by the authors of the standards themselves. Our agenda, we will be talking about the two assessment consortia to start off with, sort of familiarize you with what they are and which one you and your state happen to be a member of. We'll also give you some timelines and some basic assessment info about each one. Each one is going to create slightly different tests, but we'll talk about that in more detail. And we think we'll be providing some very important information for teachers, and that includes some released items that are coming out much more frequently now than they have been in about the past year. I may give you an overview, give you some background information, and also share with you some great resources that you can turn to for more help on your own learning about the Common Core. And like Jesse said, we'll have a chance for questions at the end. If you do have a question about Common Core or Common Core assessment, just type it into the question box in your little control panel, and Jesse will organize those, and we will get to as many of those as we can at the end. Did I miss anything, Neil?
I don't think so.
Fantastic. Here is where we're going to start. We're going to start with the assessment consortia. These are the two standards. One is PARC, the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers, and the other is the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. Each state that has joined into the Common Core effort has joined up with one of these consortia, although there's some that are working with both. And it is these consortia who will set the guidelines for assessment items, and it sounds like they will not be writing the tests themselves, but they will be awarding the contracts to companies need to look like and how they need to function.
I think one important thing to mention too is that these two consortia are working more together than as competitors, and they seem to be stealing, borrowing, sharing the best ideas between both. So you'll notice over time, if you're tracking both of them, that some of the best ideas in PARC are moving to Smarter Balanced, and vice versa.
Yeah, that's good information because it seems very odd that you would have two different organizations designing common assessments, but I think the thinking behind it is probably that together they're better and can work together more so than separately to create a good test. Here is the most recent map of which states belong in which. As you can see, the blue are members of the Smarter Balanced Consortium, and the orange are in the PARC. There are a couple that are in both. Each state has a different role, and we'll spare you the specifics of that But there's some states that are governing states and some states that are just member states. The governing states have votes in the decision-making process and things like that. So it's pretty vital at this point, even though the tests may end up looking the same, it's vital at this point to know which state your which consortium, I should say, your state belongs to, so that that can be your main source of information. Both the Smarter Balance website and the Park website, which we'll be sharing with you at the end, have this information stated if you're not familiar with which state you belong to.
As I understand it as well, the states North Dakota, Alabama, and Pennsylvania are going to end up picking one of the choices. They just haven't made up their minds yet. So they're sort of playing both sides at the same time. Also, District of Columbia and U.S. Virgin Islands are also part of Park, in case anyone happens to be fortunate enough to be in U.S. Virgin Islands right now.
And we apologize to all of those who are and for not being on the map. Sorry about that. We will please invite us to your schools there, and we'll make it up to you. We're going to start with talking about Smarter Balance, and again, I think the larger number of states are members of the Smarter Balance Consortium. They are operating on a very similar timeline to Park, but their timeline involves starting pilot testing during this school year and then evaluating those tests, starting field tests next year, and by 2014-15 launching the assessment system completely ready to go for all member schools by that year. Those tests will look slightly similar, although there are some subtle differences to talk about. The Smarter Balance tests are going to be designed to be given during the last 12 weeks of the school year, so they'll be like a testing window. And the tests that students will take at the end of that school year, and again, this is for grades 3 through 12. Those would be the grades that are going to be tested. There will be a summative assessment as well as performance tasks. The summative assessment will be taken on the computer, and it will be what they call an adaptive assessment. The questions themselves will adapt to the responses that students give. So hopefully to glean better data and more information about the students' true abilities. That will for both ELA and mathematics. For ELA and mathematics, there will also be a performance task, and it's my understanding that those will be scored by people, and those involve 1 to 3 longer assessment items. We'll give you a really good example towards the end of the webinar here. That sit down and in 160 to 120-minute session solve a big problem or create something. In addition to this, SBAC and Park are offering interim assessments. Details are a little bit fuzzy on those right now and what they'll look like, but those will be optional for districts, and it sounds like things that would probably have to be purchased too, depending on what's going on with that. Neil's going to talk a little bit more about Park now.
Not too much to add. Ben said most of it, but the assessments will be both math and language arts. We're talking about math today. And somebody asked last time about sort of where these are coming from and whether it was a federal initiative or No Child Left Behind. And Park is actually funded through a $186 million grant from the Race to the Top competition. So that's where a lot of money is coming from this. The Park test is also computerized, but it is not adaptive. One of the most popular adaptive tests right now you might be familiar with is NWEA's MAP test, but that's going to be for Smarter Balanced. The two summative assessments are at the end of the year, like we said, and there's formative assessments along the way to provide instruction at the beginning and then also to look for interventions along the way.
One of the things to note also that I didn't add there about Smarter Balance is they're also funded by a grant from Race to the Top, and the contracts I think have been awarded, and I'll talk about this slide in a minute, but the contracts have been awarded, and it looks like the Smarter Balance contract was awarded to McGraw-Hill for writing their test items, and Park actually awarded theirs to two. They're contracting with ETS and Pearson, so it'll be those two organizations that'll create assessment items for Park. And it sounds like each of those contractors are going to create, tons, scads of items, and then it'll be the assessment consortia that chooses which ones from each organization to use. And again, it'll be the test items will all be required to be built on the criteria that the consortia have set. This is just a slide here that shows what Neil was talking about, similar to the one that we showed you with Smarter Balanced, some optional assessments, as well as some a performance-based part and a computer summative part. Both of the consortia have talked or have plans to create a larger than they have now sort of digital library or clearinghouse, depending on what they're calling it, of resources for schools. There also is some talk about not adding but creating banks of information for those grade level teachers too, to help prepare students as well. Neil wants to talk a little bit about the two different kinds of standards because they play a huge part in the design of the assessment items.
So there are two sort of broad categories of math standards with Common Core. The first one is mathematical practice, and those don't really change. They're the same across grade levels, just listed as an MP standard on Common Core standard sheets. And roughly speaking, they are problem solving, proving things, and communication. The other side is standards for mathematical content, and those show a progression from kindergarten through end of high school, and they build off each other. And the letters you'll see are OA for operations algebraic thinking, NBT for number and operation in base 10, NF for number and operation fractions, MD for measurement and data, and G for geometry. That'll make sense a little more too later on when we talk about being assessed by some of these released items.
So we'll also talk at the end. We'll show you some resources where you can see exactly what the consortia have done, because when they require the problems that the test makers are creating not only to be tied to content standards, grade level content standards like Neil talked about, but also each problem needs to be tied to one or more standards of mathematical practice. So they're building their assessments off different claims, which are slightly more specific types of problems. So we'll show you towards the end here the link that you can go to sort of learn all you can possibly learn about the ways that the test items are developed. It's sort of fascinating if you're sort of geeky into it like us. We do want to share some of the sample items. The ones you're going to see today are from both Park and Smarter Balance. Both consortia have made it clear that what they're trying to do is get it for students to get away from problems that are easy to guess. So they're making the problems more challenging to guess. And let me just show you one example here. Oops. Here's an example that Smarter Balance provides about what an assessment might look like before. A simple multiple choice question, or as Smarter Balance calls it, a selected response question, not multiple choice anymore, selected response of a fraction question for third grade. So you choose the model below that best represents the fraction 2/5. And you see is what they're looking at changing to problems that are more like this, where you've got multiple problems within one bigger problem where you're having to answer about each one. So sort of making it impossible to completely guess and demonstrate true understanding, making it a slightly more challenging test. And this is something to keep in mind as we design our own assessments for our classrooms and things like that, because we have to know that these changes are happening. And so that's why it's so sort of exciting, at least for us, to have these released items finally coming out and becoming more accessible, because in the first couple of years, once the standards were adopted, nobody really knew what they were going to look like. And now we're going to be able to see. Here's a fourth grade problem. And again, this is considered a selected response question because they have to choose between yes and no. But this problem is assessing an operations and algebraic thinking standard for fourth grade. And that standard deals with the students should be able to multiply or divide to solve word problems involving multiplicative comparison. For example, by using drawings and equations with a symbol for the unknown number to represent the problem, distinguishing multiplicative comparison from additive comparison. That is the standard itself. This is what that particular standard looks like on the Smarter Balanced assessment. Some information and some questions to answer yes or no. And you see this is very different from maybe a division problem that Neil and other of our colleagues are seeing as they're giving, at least in Michigan, we're giving the state test this week and last week. This problem to us here in Michigan, at least, and we can assume all over, looks very different than it would in lots of reading involved in these problems. We've hardly seen any sample problems come out that don't involve a large deal of reading, showing you the importance. You know, the ELA standards talk about complex text. Well, it's also important to think about with the mathematics standard too. This is from third grade standard, NBT2 numbers in base 10. The standard is fluently add and subtract within 1,000 using strategies and algorithms based on place value, properties of operations, and/or the relationship between addition and subtraction. This is not just a place value question, but also a thinking problem and thinking about addition and trying to figure it out. And again, at the end, we are going to show you where to find problems like this and these problems that are being released by the consortia. Neil has quite an interesting part question here for fourth grade he wants to talk to you about.
So the last two we looked at were Smarter Balanced, and the next three are actually Park, and I think you'll see a lot of similarities and a few differences. The people who at Park list these three standards as sort of the standards being assessed on these following questions. You notice there's two MP questions like I talked about before, and then numbers in base 10 also. I think what's important for me is the standards of mathematical practice, where constructing viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others, and attend to precision. I think that the MP.3 really is quite clear in the following couple of questions. These are sort of presented as a set. So part A of this question is simply putting these three stadiums from, I think, what does it say, least to greatest. It's a bonus on this one because you can actually move the tiles and manipulate the tiles before you have to submit your answer. And this one is, you're not critiquing at all. You're just simply applying the numbers and operations in base 10 standard. It gets a little harder, or a little more in depth, where you have to compare these two things that students have said. Jeff said, I got the same number when I rounded all three numbers of seats in the stadiums, and Sarah said, when I rounded them, I got the same number for two of the stadiums, but a different number for the other stadium. Can Jeff and Sarah both be correct? Explain how you know. So this is taking that whole idea of critiquing others' reasonings, and how can both of them be right. And I don't know what's going on in most classrooms, but from what I've seen in my teaching, it's not very common to be critiquing other people's thinking in a formal way. Perhaps in a conversation you might say, well, do you agree with so-and-so or disagree? But in this case, it's actually a constructive response where you have to explain. And I believe a lot of times it also asks for specific evidence. And obviously this would be a case of rounding to which place value you're rounding to. And this is sort of part C of the same question. and this is going to be much more of an explaining kind of question. Um, and in part C, the students are asked to justify their conclusions, to come up with an answer and justify it. And this addresses both the precise communication and the flexible reasoning. So you have to precisely say what you want to say, but also should be able to adjust your thinking with the data that you have. And then the following slide here is a rubric, and it shows you how each of the items are scored. I'm not going to go in depth at this. You can check this out on Park's website, which I provided a link to at the end. But you can see that wrong answer and partial credit's possible depending on the explanation, how precise it is. And I think it's a lot more in depth and a lot more almost English language arts like, where there's a rubric to grade rather than just a simple right or wrong answer.
And all of the ones that are coming out of Smarter Balance too offer up these rubrics, and they also talk about some of the ones even for this discuss, why each of the multiple or selected response choices are included, and why they're, distractors, and why there might be mistakes that students make. So it's pretty interesting to examine that. In our last webinar, we did talk about the shifts in mathematical thinking, and this slide of a sample problem from Smarter Balance for third grade kind of exhibits that, because one of the shifts is away from sort of surface level understanding towards a deeper understanding of mathematical concepts. And one of the notes on this that's provided by Smarter Balance says, where the assessments will be moving away from kids thinking about fractions as parts of a circle or parts of a pizza, and more towards thinking about them, thinking about what they really are, which is numbers, and where they are located on the number line. So as early as third grade, these sorts of questions will be asked. One of the things that Neil alluded to also with the ability to manipulate those numbers in that stadium question, because it is a test that will be taken on the computer, is there are questions with some built-in sort of interactivity. In this fifth grade question, when the problem opens, the little swimmers there swim across the screen. I guess I should have made a little video for you, but the little swimmers swim across the screen, and then their times stop when they reach the end. And then you have a question there that's a pretty in-depth question about the data that's given from the graphic. This is also sort of builds on what Neil is talking about in some of these other problems, and also ties back into our other webinar, because the vertical alignment is key. And so you see how they're doing the same things at different grades. They're explaining and thinking and using those same standards of mathematical practice. They're just a little more in-depth the older that students get. And if we have some middle school friends here today, we want to look too at some middle school problems. Here's an example combining negative numbers with work with fractions, and you see students would drag the answers into the box, so a selected response there. Really getting away from problems that only test one standard, and problems that are easy to guess, and problems that are like your typical multiple choice questions that you might see. And one of the most daunting things as teachers when it comes to working, and this has become a part of our conversations here at our school, and it definitely needs to be, because the tests are 2.5 years away, and while that seems like a long time, it really isn't. We do have to start preparing our students, and I would imagine our students that represent a fairly good sample in terms of what they've been working on. But we don't do a lot of performance tasks, especially in math. And what the test makers are talking about when they talk about performance tasks, they're talking about 1 to 3 problems where you have to sit down and you're given extended period to solve them. A great deal of synthesizing of information is usually required. A great deal of writing is usually required. And here's an example of a 6th grade performance task. All of the performance all assess more than one standard. This particular one is labeled with 7 different standards ranging from grades 4 through 6, and usually as well. So you've got your design a garden question, and okay, and then it has 2 different parts as well, and some decisions that have to be made. Sorry to go forward there, but some judgments and decisions that have to be made, and not only made but justified and written about. Neil, you're seeing some of these sorts of problems come out of Park as well. This is a smarter balance question. Anything else you would say about this type of problem?
I think it's like a story problem on steroids. I mean, it takes a real life scenario and has and it has students work through a real life situation. So you're building a garden, and you have to figure out um, all these different aspects and fit them all together so that the garden will work the way it wants to. And a lot of times they involve money or time and sort of balancing a real life equation. And a lot of the things at the end, to the big meat of it, isn't always even a right or wrong answer. Like if you look at the bottom of the slide right now, the big question is explain your answers using diagrams, pictures, mathematical expressions, and/or words. So it's the explain. But the explanation is also really key.
Right, that whole justifying your thinking, explaining your thinking using evidence. A lot of things that are happening in English and language arts classes, or need to be happening in English and language arts classes, are going to have to be happening in math classes too. And not to keep referencing our past webinar, but we did talk a lot about the shifts and the changes, and I think this is a great example of the shift towards application and real life problems. And these are what you're going to see in these sample problems. These released items really bring all of that to life. If you're familiar with the shifts that the authors have talked about in terms of mathematics, and you're familiar with the changes and the different ways we're going to have to teach math, these problems illustrate it perfectly. Again, if you do have questions, I'm going to just pause here to remind you to type them into the question box. Jessie, our friend from 10 Marks, will be collecting those, and she'll be sharing them with you as time allows. It looks like we'll be getting to those in just a handful of minutes. Anything you can think of that comes to mind, please add that in there. We might be answering one of them as we are going to share with you some resources when the recording becomes available, or when and also we'll be publishing this slide deck shortly, so stay tuned to both of our blogs, 10 Marks and Engaging Educators. But these are the links that you'll be able to use to get to the Smarter Balance information, and as well as the Park information. I will say that the second link on the Smarter Balance side contains actual interactive items that are annotated, and also that you can actually do on your computer. You can manipulate the little boxes. You can move them around. I'm not sure if Park has something like that.
That's true for the second bullet point on Park as well.
And
the toolbox.
And this is what we've been waiting for, I feel like, to know what these tests are going to look like. The first bullet on the Smarter Balance side has some links to some more complicated stuff, some more complex stuff. I referenced earlier the sort of documents that explain what the criteria are, explain the different claims that the problems are based on. A lot of the more these would be the sort of documents that were provided to the test makers themselves, the contractors, so that to guide their work. And these would be in the format that they would be working from. And so it gives you even a little bit more in-depth information. They have some big zip files with not just math problems, but ELA on that site as well. Any other insight to add to some of these Park sites, Neil?
I think the only one I'd add anything to is the fourth bullet point is a newsletter that Park releases regularly to keep you up to date on all of the happenings on the Park side. And
not to be outdone, Smarter Balance, and that third link there has all everything you need to know and to stay connected with the Smarter Balance side. And they do have an e-newsletter that they send out monthly and things like that. And this sort of goes along with what we were saying, is that one of the groups comes up with an idea or does something, and then the other group seems to do that very same thing shortly thereafter. So they're definitely pushing each other and working towards that end of sort of cooperation, maybe along the lines. Uh, just to share with you a couple other resources that you may find useful and things that we found useful along the way. A lot of states are coming out with some very helpful resources. Um, some states are a little bit behind in this or don't have things as well organized as others. These five on your screen right here, if you Google them and the words Common Core resources or just Common Core, you're going to find a lot of great things. North Carolina and Ohio, I know, have unpacked the standards slightly differently, but in a way that's very helpful to folks who are trying to understand them. And I know that also, in addition to these two, a couple others include Kentucky and Tennessee. Tennessee, especially for grades K through 3, has put together some fantastic resources and even some units of study for the Common Core standards at that level. And now it would be, I'd be remiss not to shamelessly plug our own blog where we are regularly posting Common Core resources, and our Twitter account where we talk about Common Core on a regular basis. Anything we find, we share with you. We want to work together. We want to help educators, and we want to have a shared dialogue around this huge change that is coming very, very shortly. It is time for Q&A. So unless Neil has anything to add at this point.
Only a couple things I would add. Last time we mentioned checking out our Digo bookmarks for Common Core. You can find those from our website, engageeducators.com, and also on Twitter, the hashtag CCChat is sort of an ongoing conversation and shared resources about Common Core.
Yeah, there's good stuff there every day. We'll throw it to Jesse here, who hopefully has some questions lined up that we can answer. And again, if you haven't submitted one yet and you do have one, please add it to the question box.
Of course I have questions for you guys. The first one, let's see. We have a question just asking for you to clarify what Smarter Balance is. I'm not sure if the person entered a little bit late or...
No problem. We're happy that they are here. Smarter Balanced is one of the two assessment consortia. It's an assessment consortium that basically organizes tests for other people, and it was awarded a grant to design tests aligned to the Common Core state standards. The other assessment consortium is called PARC, and every state that's participating is in either one or the other, and we talked about there's a couple that are in both. But if you're in a Smarter Balanced state, then your state will be using tests that are developed by Smarter Balanced. Well, I'm strike that, not developed by Smarter Balanced, but that are organized by Smarter Balanced. Each of the consortia has awarded contracts to testing companies to create the tests for them based on the criteria that they have created.
Okay. The next question that I have for you, for PARC, will the end of the year summative be given in March like current state testing, or will it be done later in the year?
I believe it's later in the year. I think March is specific to a given state. Like here in Michigan, we give our assessment in October. That's how smart we are here. But as far as I know, it's listed as end of the year assessment. It's listed at end of the year on their timeline. I have not seen a specific date because there is a mid-year assessment, which I would assume would be someplace in the February range to sort of assess your progress towards the end of year assessment. But I don't know of an exact date for the assessment.
Okay, let me take a look at this one last question. Oh, sorry, having a technical difficulty over here. The next question I have for you, it seems, this person says, it seems that there's a little bit of panic about adopting the Common Core standards with administrators and some teachers not knowing how to wade through all of the information out there. Can you make any suggestions just for how to mitigate some of the Common Core craziness going on right now?
I think first is to get informed. I think a lot of the resources we've shared with you today are what we learned
Oh no.
changes here that are almost revolutionary in education, and that there's a lot of unknown out there. And sticking together and working together is one way to go at that. But I think definitely, familiarizing yourself with the standards first and foremost, and also with these released items that are coming out, is one of the best ways to sort of understand what the Common Core is going to be all about.
I think also that good teaching is still good teaching. Um, I don't think the standards are, I don't think the content being discussed in the standards is a titanic shift from where most states are. I think that it's more of a change in mindset about how to get to the standards. Um, I think that it's much more of a shift towards project-based learning, or at least smaller-based projects. Um, and in my opinion, it's good teaching anyways, and what I've been doing in the past as well. So I think it's really just a sort of a, there's no reason to panic, just like Ben said, be informed.
Awesome. I have one more question for you. This teacher is wondering if you had any tips for building Common Core question types into the classroom assessments that they already do. Is there a certain kind of question or way of asking questions that has started to stand out, or should you just keep an eye on what's coming out and mimic that appropriately?
I think definitely keep an eye on what's coming out, but as far as what's already going on in the classroom, it's a lot more justifying, explaining, writing about your math. It's taking it's taking a lot of the sort of the skills in isolation and putting them together to create a more authentic sort of math environment.
And I think too, not you can't just think about changing your assessments. You do have to modify and adapt your assessments, but it may be it may be cause to modify your teaching practices as well, and really look at the types of problems you're giving students to work on during the day in between those assessments. Are those is that work aligned to what's going to be expected on these assessments? Because if you just work on multiplying two-digit numbers for 6 weeks and then give students a test that's completely word problems and they've never seen a word problem, that's not going to inform your practice very well, or it's not going to help them prepare for the type of thinking that the Common Core is going to call for. So not just thinking about it in terms of assessment, but thinking about it in terms of shifting your teaching too.
I think also someone asked last time about, I think, ESL, or Spanish
Yes.
material of some sort, and somebody DM'd us on Twitter, and I also sort of racked my own memory, and Turk, they do what's it called, Ben?
Investigations.
Investigations is a math curriculum that's been around for a long time, and I think that that curriculum itself is much more aligned to sort of what Common Core is. And Ben said last time to be careful with things like these textbooks that just stick a Common Core sticker on them and say that they're aligned to Common Core by just tweaking a few lessons. But so at our school currently, unfortunately, the teachers are doing a lot of heavy lifting because there isn't the content out there that we can find that actually um, helps us sort of shift our teaching into a Common Core, and we're a smarter balanced state, so a smarter balanced test. So we're sort of forced to do it, but it's also pretty exciting as well. But I imagine in the near future, these bigger publishers like Everyday Math will really come out with, or at least will try to come out with something that's much more aligned to Common Core.
There's actually a question about whether there are any accommodations that are going to be made for second language learners. Do you guys have any information on that?
There is I have my list of FAQ here it's in about 5-point font. I know for Smarter Balanced, it said that as part of the Race to the Top assessment application, Smarter Balance made a commitment to translate the mathematics interim and summative assessments into five languages, including Spanish and sign language. So it sounds like they're working on that right now for Smarter Balance. I think the assumption would be that that would be required.
Oh, okay. I have one more. Oh, I have a request for you. Could you show the
Oh yeah,
map from the beginning of the presentation again?
sure. Let me find that.
Well, you know, it's Common Core. You have to know which side.
Oh, sorry. I'm wigging. Sorry. Um, can you still hear me? All
Yes,
right.
I can still hear you.
Okay. My computer went crazy, but here's that map. We'll enlarge it here, I think. What's going on?
Just
Well, Ben fights you. The park states are Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, District of Columbia, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Mississippi, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Tennessee, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Those are the parks. And you either Smarter Balance or you're not in the consortia plan because you're not part of Common Core.
And my computer's crashing.
okay. Well,
Or just frozen.
Okay, well, I can see your screen. I have one more question if we're able to get it. Where can you find support for lesson planning using the Common Core?
There are quite a few spots you can look. You have to sort of look carefully and verify that what you're doing is actually what you want to be doing. I know like there's a Smart Tech Exchange for smartboard lessons.
Like sharemylesson.com has a lot of their stuff aligned to Common Core. Several of the sort of the lesson exchange slash lesson housing sites are offering you the option to search by Common Core standard now. I know there's a site called betterlesson.com that offers free resources. For ELA, there's one called readworks.org that's pretty handy and is also tied to standards and has lessons and things like that. There are several, and even though they're not coming to the top of my head specifically, but there are continuously sites being shared on Twitter using that CC chat handle that Neil alluded to, the hashtag #CC chat, and you constantly come across sites that are helpful in that regard. In terms of shameless plugging, I think it would be good too to talk about. We'd love to help any school that needs help or to come do a similar webinar for you guys or in person or online. Just with helping, I can do a webinar better than I'm doing right now, I swear. But we're happy to engage in that conversation, and we really think that that's going to be the most important part. How do you start it from here? That we think that's going to be the most important part of what happens as we go forward.
I don't know on a Mac.
There you go. I can see that. Have you recovered from the computer crashing? Is that the?
I think so. We're going to scroll through to our contact info, if that's okay. Sorry.
No, it's completely fine. I got the giggles. It happens.
Oh, darn it. All right, hang on.
Oh no.
Ben's using a Mac.
Yeah, it's a Mac. Sorry, Max.
You better be careful.
But we're definitely happy to answer any of those questions. Will there be an edited recording?
Possibly.
Okay, I'll pay you.
Give me just a second. Okay, it looks like we have answered all of the questions. I'll give another minute just in case anything else pops up. or in case anyone's computers want to crash over there, an engaging educator basement.
Closet.
I think the key though is everything is changing so fast, and today we've tried to provide sort of the concrete structure, but really keeping up with either Twitter or the links provided in the previous slide to see how things are changing and developing. A couple of months ago, we had no release items at all, and we were scrambling to try to figure out how to plan our teaching, and now we have release items coming out our ears, so it's a good thing, and it's just through constantly checking in and see how things are changing.
Well, with all of that being said, I want to thank you guys so much for coming and giving us all of this great information about Common Core assessment. I'm going to go ahead and close this thing down for the day. I want to thank everyone else who came and attended and asked questions. You've all been wonderful, and we hope that this was helpful to you. Ben, Neil, see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, 10 Marks. We appreciate it. Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you so much. Bye.